Hello and welcome to a short film that provides an introduction to the world of dangerous goods transportation. It may not sound like the most entertaining title in the range of films available to view, but understanding how the transportation of chemicals around the world makes you realise just how much we take these essential products, substances and articles for granted. You may have already forgotten what you learnt in the chemistry lessons at your last school, and while the intention of this film is not to take you back to those days where you struggled to comprehend things that really weren't that important to you, we do need to revisit some of the essentials. To keep it at an introductory level, chemicals exist in three main states: gases, the most abundant chemicals that we know of, liquids, and solids. If we keep these in mind, we can begin to understand some of the finer points of dangerous goods regulations that occur later on in this film, and in future training sessions. Our modern life is totally reliant on chemicals. Chemicals provide us with energy, either directly through its burning or indirectly by reacting with another substance. The energy that such reactions provide can be incredibly beneficial. Chemicals provide us with a means of propulsion too. The petrol and diesel in our vehicles all come from an organic liquid, oil. The new electric vehicles rely on chemical reactions within their batteries to provide the power. Without all this propulsive power, we would still be relying on our muscle power or on horses. The manufacturing of products and goods is reliant on chemicals to either power the machines that make the products or in using the chemical-based products to form part of the products itself. Industry and manufacturing rely on strong chemicals to provide a cleaning solution to keep the machines working. The water that we drink here in the UK is cleaned by it passing through a screen of toxic chemical gas to ensure that all the bacteria and viruses within it are killed so as not to cause us serious harm. Progress has always been achieved by our ability to be inquisitive about chemicals and to harness the power of the properties that they have to our own advantage. It's difficult to imagine a modern world without chemicals. Our progress in the last 200 years has been startling. Unfortunately, the benefits of using these chemicals for our own good come with a price to pay. Many of the chemicals that we use have harmful effects. No matter what state the chemical is in, gas, liquid or solid, there is always the potential for harm, injury, ill health or property damage. These effects are well known. Chemicals can explode, ignite, poison, corrode, infect and ionize. These effects can have a significant impact on both the mode of transport carrying them, as well as the environment in which they are carried. To assist with identifying these risks, a committee of chemical experts have classified these chemicals into 9 distinct chemical hazard classes: explosives, gases, flammable liquids, flammable solids, oxidizing agents, toxic substances, radioactives, corrosives, and miscellaneous. To provide further warning of the chemical hazard that each class has, specific hazard warning labels have been designed to be carried on both packages, containers and vehicles to warn others of the significant chemical risks that exist within. We will look at the specific classification criteria of these chemical classes in future films. In deciding how to transport these chemicals safely, we need to understand that there are thousands of chemical products, substances and articles that require movement. Some of them are more dangerous than others. Those chemicals that present the biggest risk of harm, injury, property damage or environmental damage are forbidden for carriage. They cannot be safely transported without significant reduction in risk. At the other end of the scale, there are chemicals that pose very little risk of harm, injury, property or environmental damage. These have no restrictions on their transportation. These are called not restricted goods. In between the forbidden and not restricted chemicals lie the restricted chemicals. These present an unacceptable risk of flammability, explosion, toxicity, corrosion or any other specified risk of damage to property, life or the environment. These chemicals are collectively known as dangerous goods. The transportation of dangerous goods is heavily controlled and restricted. The controls are derived from the United Nations Dangerous Goods Manual, known as the Orange Book. After the last World War, the United Nations set about rebuilding the shattered economies of the war-torn nations and put in place various committees to organise and put in place structures to boost economic growth and development. The movement of chemicals between refineries, factories, distribution centres and markets was seen as an essential factor in forging modern, prosperous and peaceful nations. Each mode of transport uses the Orange Book to devise its own set of rules and procedures to manage the risk of transporting these chemicals. These rules and procedures are known as codes. Transporting chemicals that are not restricted has recently come under the guidance of the GHS system, the Global Harmonized System of Chemical Identification and Labeling. Transporting chemicals that are forbidden for transport can only be conducted by mutual agreement between two nations or a group of nations. These are known as bilateral or multilateral agreements. All codes and systems have no legal standing. The United Nations expects its member countries to pass their own laws and regulations to enforce the guiding principles of each code. Here in the UK, we have specific legislation that gives each transportation code and chemical labelling system full legal status. There are four main modes of transporting dangerous goods. The oldest is transportation by sea. Today, this is controlled under the IMDG code. The demand for chemical imports increased greatly during the Industrial Revolution, and the discovery of oil in America and Romania saw a greater demand for the chemical. The UK had the largest merchant marine fleet in the world at the time, and it developed a system of controlling the safety aspects required to ensure that such loads did not ignite or explode when being transported. Rail transport was the next to adopt a code. Getting the oil from the wells to the refineries was either done by pipeline or by tank cars pulled by locomotive. A system of safety procedures was properly established in the 1890s and exists today in the modern Railway Dangerous Goods Code known as RID. Air transport saw the formulation of safety procedures and a dangerous goods manual in the 1950s. This saw gradual acceptance by most airlines at first, but a few notable incidents that involved plane crashes in the 1970s and the 1980s saw universal adoption by all airlines that belonged to the IATA. Today, the Air Dangerous Goods Code is contained within the IATA Dangerous Goods Manual, which is revised annually. Last but by no means least of the big four is the Dangerous Goods by Road safety procedures. A European system was agreed in the 1950s but did not see proper adoption until the 1980s, as each member state preferred to rely on their own national legislation to control the transport of chemicals by road. However, it made sense to align the procedures and have a common system in place, and in the 1990s and the first year of the new millennium, we saw the adoption of ADR across most European countries. The four transportation codes may share common procedures and arrangements, but both air and sea tend to impose more restrictions than road and rail. Why is this? This is due to the perceived transport risk. Road transportation has a small amount of risk. The cost of replacing a damaged lorry involved in an incident is about $100,000. The risk to life and the environment is small. Environmental spillages are localized and easily controlled. A similar level of risk exists for rail transport, although the cost of replacing the property is greater. To replace a freight train would cost around $18 million, and the environmental damage is greater due to the larger volumes of chemicals being carried. There is still a low risk to life. Transportation by sea carries a far greater cost in both property damage. To replace a container ship will cost in the region of $195 million, and the environmental damage would be huge. However, the loss of human life would still only be slight. Transportation by air carries the greatest risk in both cost and human life. One plane, in this case a Boeing 787, can cost $205 million each, more than a container ship. The loss of life is also unacceptable, anywhere between 100 to 300 for standard airliners, increasing to almost 500 lives in the new super jumbo airliners, such as the A330. In both sea and air transportation modes, the increased transport risk demands tighter and more restrictive controls. That's a sensible approach. Each transportation code places specific legal responsibilities on each party involved in the transport chain. These duties are essential to ensure the safe transport of dangerous goods. Failure to apply these legal responsibilities creates an unacceptable risk. This is the most common reason that dangerous goods items are prevented from continuing their journey, particularly by air and sea. If the pre-loading checks identify that there is something wrong with the way that the freight has been packaged, labelled, declared, or documented, then the airline, shipping line, or freight forwarder is completely justified in refusing to take the freight until it conforms to the specific requirements of the transportation codes. If everyone applies the rules, then all dangerous goods transportation will be performed safely. If consignors bend or fail to apply the rules, then the modes of transport, lives on them and around them, and the environment in which they operate are put at risk. To summarise then, transporting of dangerous goods can be performed safely provided that everyone involved in their transport applies the required safety conditions and rules. These rules are more restrictive based on the perceived risk to loss of life or damage to property and/or the environment. Failure to apply these rules will see dangerous goods freight being delayed and further costs applied. This completes the short introduction to dangerous goods. Further information can be obtained by contacting Dan Lee Training, who are able to offer high-quality dangerous goods awareness courses and transport-specific courses in both road and sea dangerous goods codes. Please look out for further information films to develop your knowledge and appreciation of the rules, systems, procedures, and regulations that ensure that dangerous goods continued to be transported safely.